The merchants were eagerly sharing their opinions, sipping their drinks one after another, fearful someone might snatch the drinks away from them. Gamer stared at the green beverage in his glass, which seemed to be still fizzing. The apple flavor lingered on his palate, leaving him craving more. Licking his lips in satisfaction, Gamer forgot all about manners, burping while inquiring Roland about this mysterious chaos drink as it was simply too delicious. Roland chuckled and explained that the drink contained dry ice, which could also be referred to as a carbonated beverage. None of these terms made sense to Gamer. However, that was not important. Roland then asked Gamer if he thought such a chaos drink, if marketed, would find a place in the market. Without hesitation, Gamer affirmed it would definitely be a hit. Considering personal tastes, there might be slight variations in the popularity of 3 different flavors, but each was an exquisite brew in its own right. He boldly claimed that after tasting these, the finest fruit wines from the Kingdom of Dawn might soon be forgotten. Roland smiled and remarked on Gamer's honesty, noting how unusual it was for a merchant to praise goods without looking for flaws to negotiate a lower price. Gamer earnestly replied that he didn't wish to deceive Roland or his own taste buds. But he had one question: why use such a weird name for the beverage? Gamer and Margaret shared their thoughts, suggesting that the term chaos was innovative but failed to highlight their distinct tastes. Using separate names would likely make them more marketable. Roland shook his head, reiterating what he previously said about how each sip was unique. In reality, these 3 bottles were the last of their stock. The merchants then realized that these same beverages could no longer be reproduced. Roland explained that this was precisely why he named them chaos. Each flavor was unique and with every sip more valuable than the previous sips. The merchants were visibly struck by the news, realizing they might never again taste the unique flavors they had just experienced. Roland gestured dismissively, admitting that while he couldn't reveal the process of making the chaos drink, there are still other chaos drinks available. However, they all taste different. The only commonality, he noted, was their exceptional taste. The merchants understood that rarity and quality made these irreplicable drinks a potential goldmine. Gamer was the first to express interest, hoping Roland would share these products with his trading fleet. He boasted of his ships that sailed along the coasts of all 4 kingdoms, promising substantial returns for Roland. Another merchant, curious, pointed out that Gamer's primary focus was in the Kingdom of Dawn territory and when he had expanded to other trade routes. Seizing the opportunity, the merchant quickly boasted that his fleet was the most extensive in the Wolfheart Kingdom. Observing their dispute, Roland suggested establishing a joint trading guild. This guild would prevent the downward pressure on prices due to unnecessary competition. Participants could negotiate their respective territories, with the city of Neverwinter solely responsible for supplying the goods. This approach would enable quick sales through familiar channels without direct competition among the merchants. Profits would be distributed according to a pre-agreed contract, ensuring security for all involved. The merchants quickly grasped the concept, but questions arose regarding the specifics of territorial divisions and profit sharing, considering the transportation costs are different across regions. Roland had anticipated these concerns, suggesting they continue discussions until a satisfactory agreement was reached by all parties. Margaret was the first to show support, and others soon followed suit. Roland nodded in satisfaction, reminding them that working together was always more powerful than going alone. Soon after, the joint trading guild was established. Meanwhile, on Slumbering Isle, Camilla had already gathered names of the witches willing to send support to the Western Territory. Tilly picked up the list and scrutinized it. More than half of the witches on the Slumbering Isle were willing to help, a much better outcome than she had anticipated. Prior to this, Tilly had been transparent with the witches on the fjord, clearly communicating about the previous witch kingdom, the Federation, and the demons. However, everyone also had the option to continue living in the fjord. Thinking about this, Camilla mentioned that most were intrigued by King Roland defeating the church, and were all eager to meet him. Tilly noticed Camilla's apprehension and wanted to know what she wanted to say. Camilla shared her concerns. Roland is still a noble, and there was a risk that the witches might transfer their trust from Tilly to him. Camilla believed that, when it came to interests, blood ties could sometimes be an obstacle, but it was best to prepare for the worst. What would they do if Roland turned out to be like other nobles? Tilly set down the list and took Camilla's hand, assuring her that she had made this decision after thorough thoughts. She acknowledged the uncertainty of the future, but under the threat of the Third Divine War, if they failed, Camilla's hand. Obstacle. And there was a risk that the witches might transfer their trust from Tilly to him. Camilla believed that, when it came to interests, blood ties could sometimes be an obstacle, but it was best to prepare for the worst. What would they do if Roland turned out to be like other nobles? Tilly set down the list and took Camilla's hand, assuring her that she had made this decision after thorough thoughts. She acknowledged the uncertainty of the future, but under the threat of the Third Divine War, if they failed, there would be no future to consider at all. Their current shared goal was simply to survive. Tilly, with an unexplainable look in her eyes, suggested that instead of completely avoiding the outside world, they could use this opportunity to integrate into it, forming an indivisible community of interest alongside commoners. If their people and their abilities permeated various fields, even if Roland wanted to break his agreement with Slumbering Isle, he wouldn't be able to do so without the power of the witches. Oh my god, you bad Tilly. Camilla remained worried that Roland might impose excessive restrictions on them. But Tilly urged her not to be overly pessimistic. Based on her observations over the past 6 months, Roland hadn't placed any extra limitations on any witch. Ultimately, Tilly chose to trust her instincts, believing that Roland wouldn't do such a thing. Camilla nodded, assuring she would start getting everything ready for heading to the Western Territory. Camilla then shifted the conversation, revealing some disturbing rumors she had heard in recent days. Tilly, curious, asked about the nature of these rumors. Turned out, among the witches, some believed that, as their ancestors had once built a vast empire ruling over all ordinary people, they should copy the Federation and establish an organization with witches in the ruling position, to restore their ancestors' formal glory. Tilly immediately thought of the Bloodfawn. Camilla shook her head, explaining that the Bloodfawn witches believed in strength more than anything. People like Giphy, Shadowfeather, and Nightfall, and many of its original members were actually among the first to volunteer to support the city of Neverwinter. The source of the rumor, Camilla discovered, was other witch organizations. Tilly reflected on this, considering that Slumbering Isle itself was composed of various small groups, although none of them were as powerful as the Bloodfangs. Camilla asked if they should talk to the leaders of these groups, and Tilly shook her head. She believed that once everyone moved to the Western Territory, they would realize the Federation was nothing but history, and a new life awaited them. After Camilla left, Ashes approached Tilly, urging her to relax. If they made a mistake, they could always return to Slumbering Isle. Ashes reassured her with a light laugh, telling Tilly that Roland would never harm them. Because the Witch Union wouldn't stand by and let that happen. Ashes didn't want to see Tilly constantly under immense pressure. Tilly shook her head and clenched her fist, knowing she had to convince herself first to persuade others. She couldn't show any hesitation or confusion. Despite her outward confidence, it was impossible to say she wasn't a bit uneasy. Roland's agreement to let the sleeping spell continue managing the witches' relocation clearly showed his attitude, but Tilly worried whether the witches from Slumbering Isle could integrate well into the city of Neverwinter and how the ordinary people's perception of witches would really change after the Third Divine War. She felt the weight of everyone on Slumbering Isle's future on her shoulders. Changing the subject, Ashes asked if the ships were ready to sail. Tilly nodded and shared that she had also prepared many textbooks for Ashes. Ashes stepped back, waving her hand, clearly terrified by the textbooks, saying that reading on a ship would make her seasick. Tilly smiled and countered, if Ashes wants to protect her, she then needs to become stronger, and how can she do that without more knowledge? Ashes, convinced, agreed to read the textbooks. Seeing this, Tilly felt a little less troubled. Returning to the city of Neverwinter, the weather had gradually become colder, yet snow was still absent, a significant delay compared to previous years. However, this was good news for the city of Neverwinter. With sufficient grain, weapons, and established transport routes, Roland felt confident in any endeavor. Axe knocked. Axe knocked and entered, then saluted. Roland called him over, opening a map, and asked Axe if he was interested in visiting his homeland during the winter. Axe's usually stoic face lit up with rare excitement, realizing that his king was planning a campaign to the southern territory. After discussing with Axe the battle plan, Axe left the room and Nightingale emerged from the mist. She didn't understand why Roland chose this time to wage a war in the southern territory. Roland, aware of her concerns, explained that based on last year's month of the demon scale, 1,000 First Army soldiers is enough to defend the city walls. To be extra cautious, he left 2,500 soldiers behind to defend the city walls. With the recruitment of a new reserve force, the city of Neverwinter should be secure. Powerf then approached, presenting the finalized contract of the Joint Trading Guild. Roland was pleased with it, especially surprised to find a mathematical equation included by one of Powerf's disciples. Turned out that instead of a complex calculation, this equation aptly represented the agreement and was accepted by all merchants for its accuracy. Powerf seized the moment to flatter Roland, who was pleased to realize the practicality of mathematical knowledge in finance and administration. Roland then inquired about the current population, to which Powerf replied that the city of Neverwinter had reached 110,000 residents. Seizing the opportunity, Powerf complained about Edith's recent disappointing performance, citing her lack of experience in commercial trade terms. Nightingale, hidden in the mist, informed Roland that Powerf wasn't telling the truth. Powerf, unaware of Nightingale around, continued, almost drifting into a reminiscent mode about his time in the old capital and his past experiences. Roland quickly cut him off, suggesting if that's the case, then Powerf should mentor Edith more. Powerf was slightly taken aback and wanted to say more, but Roland firmly ended the discussion with a lighthearted comment. Roland also informed Powerf of his plans to campaign in the south and that he would entrust him with the specific battle plans and arrangements. Powerf nodded earnestly, promising to handle it well. After Powerf left, Nightingale appeared, commenting that Powerf's words about Edith were not true. Roland was unconcerned, noting that condemning or punishing Powerf on this matter would only deter him from openly challenging Edith. For the balance within the city hall, someone needed to keep restraining Edith, and currently, only Powerf could. Nightingale was puzzled about why Roland felt the need to restrain Edith if it was clear that Edith was capable of managing the city hall. Roland hesitated, struggling to find a reason. Was he worried about her gaining too much power? But as the king, he could replace her any time. Was it fear of her mismanagement or altering decrees? Shaking his head, Roland couldn't justify his actions except for the sake of checks and balances of power. He had always disliked this approach. Ironically, now as the king and in full power, he had subconsciously resorted to it. Nightingale's reminder made him realize he was gradually becoming the type of person he once despised the most. Taking a deep breath, about to thank Nightingale, Nightingale suddenly pointed outside, telling Roland it was snowing. Roland turned back to see the gray sky slowly filling with numerous white specks. He watched intently, aware that the month of the demons had arrived. Meanwhile, in the Hermes holy city, Tayfun sighed deeply, his dark circles evident of recent sleepless nights. He couldn't fathom how the church's elite force, the gods' punishment army, had been defeated. The pure ones all vanished without a trace, and the whereabouts of Pope Maine were unknown. It was only later he discovered Maine was never the old pope's chosen successor. The crown was passed to the pure one Zero instead. Now with the month of the demon's arrival, how would the church stop the demonic beasts? Pouring himself a cup of tea, Tayfun realized the church's power alone was insufficient. He needed to rally the Wolfheart and Eternal Winter's nobility. Suddenly, he heard the sounds of swords clashing. Approaching the window, he looked down to see a fight had broken out below. The door suddenly burst open, and a captain of the Pope's personal guard entered, followed by 10 gods' punishment warriors, urging Tayfun to leave immediately. Tayfun loudly questioned how the invaders had breached their defenses. The captain explained that the enemy had emerged from deep within the caves. Tayfun recalled those caves, asking himself, weren't the caves just a series of large and small holes? With immense shock and confusion, he followed the captain through a secret door. Stepping out of the passage, his heart sank instantly. He saw 8 enemies standing with their swords, as if they had known this was the secret passage's exit. But it was the sight of one man's face that caused Tayfun's blood to freeze. The man in front of him was the very church's warrior who later underwent the ritual to become the soulless god punishment warrior, but Tayfun remembered that this warrior had died. The blue-haired man remarked he never thought he'd set foot in the holy city again, mocking that the successors of the Acris legacy had ended up this miserable. Tayfun, in disbelief, asked what kind of monster he was. The blue-haired man laughed, saying he was no other than the warrior the church created using witch's blood and stone of god punishment. However, they seemed to miss the most crucial step, resulting in a soulless god punishment warrior. Without explaining further, they slowly closed in on Tayfun, who watched in horror as his god's punishment warriors charged at the enemies. However, their adversaries were also god's punishment warriors, seemingly even stronger. They quickly and tactically overcame Tayfun's forces. Kneeling on the ground, Tayfun pleaded for his life, claiming that without him, the holy city would fall, and the 4 kingdoms would face disaster. The blue-haired man isn't going to be fooled by Tayfun's words, as he is fully aware of what the demonic beasts are truly after. Tayfun crawled backward, not understanding what the man meant. The blue-haired man chuckled, noting that this so-called archbishop hadn't even seen the relic. Before Tayfun could respond, he felt a chill at his neck, the world's fun, and then darkness consumed him. One of the men, who was standing by the blue-haired man's side having killed Tayfun, suggested they should get on with their actual task. Another reminded him to stop the bleeding first. The man then realized he was injured on his abdomen. He cursed the lack of any feeling in his body. As he removed his armor, one commented that such a body would fetch at least 50 gold back into Kara. Another, covering his face, admitted he couldn't bear to recall their days in Takira. Compared to their life before, they felt like they were imprisoned. Suddenly, the one treating the man's wound leaned in close to his muscular chest, expressing a desire to experience the taste of man again, willing to pay any price to marry him as a husband. The others shared their wishes, some longed for a delicious steak, others yearned to bask in the sun. Although they were all tall, muscular men, their expressions and tones were surprisingly feminine. Most of you should know what's going on by now. The god punishment warriors are now possessed by the Takira witch's spirits from 400 years ago. From now on, we will refer to them using female pronouns addressing them. After their playful banter, one of them sternly reminded the group not to forget the purpose of their mission. They all stopped their jesting and proceeded seriously towards the top of the secret chamber. Reaching the top, they entered a secret chamber. Apart from a magic stone emitting a faint blue glow, the room was empty. One of them pulled out a hammer and began smashing the wall, quickly uncovering something. They worked together and torn the wall down. They broke through to another secret chamber behind the wall, housing a large, deep red crystal. This was the relic they were looking for. The blue hair, her name is Zoe, recalled Pasha's warning, telling the others to be cautious while moving the relic, not to lose focus, and to avoid connecting with the gods. The two of them carefully held the relic, walking slowly out. The relic was trying to establish a connection with them. One of them knew she needed to divert her attention, unsure whether to think of men, delicious food, or something else. Suddenly, a voice intruded into her mind, compelling her to look at the relic, promising to give her everything. She turned to Zoe, but found her eyes void of life, almost as if her soul was sucked out. Not knowing what happened but determined to save Zoe, she stared intently at the deep red crystal, feeling her soul being sucked into it. She found herself in a space with 4 huge images, nothing else. Calling Zoe's name yielded no response. She forced herself to calm down and focused on the images. One showed a demon in exquisite armor sitting, then suddenly walking towards her, she frankly walked backward, while the image behind her was a massive eyeball with 3 pupils, which suddenly extended numerous tentacles towards her. As they pulled and tugged, she felt pain and realized she had reverted to her real body. While she is being pulled, she sees the 3rd image showing her in the god's punishment warrior's body, with Zoe dragging her away. In an instant, everything vanished, and she was back in the secret chamber. Blinking a couple of times, she looked at Zoe and wondered if it was all a dream. Zoe angrily gritted her teeth and scolded her for connecting with the gods. She explained that she saw Zoe motionless and thought she was in danger, but Zoe angrily retorted that it was all an illusion created by the gods and that she would have been trapped forever if not for Zoe pulling her out of the chamber. She took a few seconds to reflect on the experience. It felt too real to be an illusion and seemingly had nothing to do with gods. Another member of the group then asked, what should they do now? Zoe urgently instructed the group to move the relic quickly, warning that the demonic beasts, with their ability to infiltrate any space, would soon find them in the cave. Meanwhile, on a boat drifting at sea, Amy excitedly ran into the cabin holding a handful of snow and presenting them to number 76. This was her first time seeing this much snow. Number 76 smiled at Amy, but her thoughts drifted to Dakara, a place never short of snow. Another witch entered, carrying herbs, and cautioned Amy not to disturb number 76, who was still recovering from her injuries. Number 76 shook her head, assuring Amy that once she was healed, they would play with snow together in the Western Territory. Broken Sword came to change number 76 patch, warning that it would be quite painful. Number 76, putting on a brave look, insisted she could endure it. After finishing applying the herbs, number 76 lay back, sweating profusely, and thanked the witches. Amy wiped her forehead with a towel, saying it was they who should be the ones saying thank you. Broken Sword nodded in agreement. York then entered, immediately noticing the pungent smell of the herbs, jokingly comparing it to a shithole. Number 76 laughed, explaining it as a tradition. People believed that the stinkiness would drive the bad stuff away. Of course, her swift recovery was credited to the extraordinary body of the God's punishment army, not the medicine itself. Before returning to the Northern Territory, number 76 had to seriously injure herself to the point of seeming near death in the eyes of others. To make it convincing, she had to increase her heart rate to raise her body temperature, accelerate blood flow, and induce sweating. Her trembling limbs and expressions were so convincing that no one could tell she was faking. However, she needs to keep this to herself. Number 76 smiled at York, who had visited her every day during their long journey. After some conversation, he grew unusually silent. Tentatively, number 76 asked if York wanted her to serve him. York earnestly replied that after everything they had been through, he had said many times that number 76 was no longer a servant but a free citizen of Grey Castle. He added softly, emphasizing that she was still injured, and said he is not one of those sick bastard upper-class nobles with weird fetishes. Number 76 chuckled and then asked York if he had anything to say to her. At her question, York's expression shifted subtly. He scratched the back of his head before asking what number 76 planned to do after they reached the city of Neverwinter. York expressed his hope that she would come to him if she faced any difficulties. He emphasized that he did not want her to continue serving others or to remain as a maid. Before leaving, York reassured her that everything would be better once they reached the city of Neverwinter. Number 76 was somewhat surprised. Had York hesitated all this time just to say these words? Touched by his concern, she smiled and thanked York. Looking at the ring in her hand, number 76 thought to herself that only by finding the chosen one could things truly start to improve. Only by defeating the demons could there be hope for the future. Several days later, they finally arrived at the city of Neverwinter. Everyone gathered in number 76 room. Amy was excited, the other two witches were hesitant, number 76 was expressionless, and Annie was visibly anxious, frequently glancing out the window. Outside, the lively sound of the bustling city filled the air, and number 76 wondered why it was so bustling despite being winter. Annie looked towards the dock and saw only 3 women, who didn't seem to be there, just to capture them. Amy stood up excitedly, but Annie remained vigilant, signaling everyone to follow her gaze and gestures. Soon, the cabin door was knocked, and Wendy, leading Nightingale and Leaf, entered with a welcoming smile. She introduced herself and welcomed everyone to the city of Neverwinter. Their unexpected hospitality caught everyone off guard. Number 76 thought to herself how even in Takara, the welcome for new witches wasn't this casual, and she was surprised that the leading witch didn't inquire about their abilities first. Just then, number 76 noticed one of the witches, a beautiful blonde, looking intently at her, as if seeing through everything. Number 76 acted timidity and looked away. Annie interrupted Wendy, asking why didn't she start by asking for their abilities. Wendy replied softly that the ability test was usually scheduled 3 days later, and they must be tired from their journey, suggesting they rest first. Annie remained tense and asked what would happen if the test showed they were of no use. Wendy assured her gently that in the city of Neverwinter, both the Witch Union and King Roland acknowledged that there was no such thing as a useless ability. Wendy understood their fears, shared by many witches who joined the city of Neverwinter, and reassured them that no one would be forced to do anything, including joining the Witch Union. Annie was taken aback, asking for clarification. Wendy patiently explained that even if they chose not to serve the king, they could live as ordinary people in the city of Neverwinter. This revelation surprised everyone, with Annie seemingly in disbelief. Wendy then took Annie's hand to reassure her, promising to explain everything gradually. Number 76 thought this environment was perfect for nurturing high awakening witches and planned to seek a private conversation with the Witch Union sometime, potentially turning them into a branch of Takara. Broken Sword timidly asked Wendy and referred to her as Lady Wendy, what kind of work witches do in the city of Neverwinter. Wendy, pleased to be asked about the city of Neverwinter, told them they didn't need to call her lady, as everyone here refers to each other as sisters. She explained that the work was related to their abilities, and they could find jobs suited to their skills. Hearing that there were witches with healing abilities, Amy's voice perked up with excitement. Nightingale looked at Wendy, who nodded in response and then encouraged everyone to introduce themselves and share their stories. Number 76 sensed the flow of magic around her, suspecting the blonde witch, Nightingale, might be using a power to detect lies. Confident in her ability to deceive, number 76 was not worried about being exposed. Starting with Amy and then moving to Annie, Hero, and Broken Sword, each person briefly shares their past. During this, Wendy asked several questions, and Leaf recorded everything in her notebook. When the questioning ended, Nightingale's gaze turned to number 76. Nightingale didn't detect any magic core in number 76, indicating she wasn't a witch. Amy introduced number 76 as their friend who helped them stall the Kingdom of Dawn's pursuers. Number 76 presented her story and past, and in the end, no one showed any sign of suspicion. Wendy thanked number 76 for saving the witches and welcomed her to the city of Neverwinter. Number 76 expressed her gratitude. At that moment, Leaf suddenly asked about the ring on number 76's chest, catching her off guard. Number 76 was surprised by the question, however, she did not show anything on her face. She then acted scared and slowly said she stole the ring from the expedition she used to work for. She then took the ring off and handed it to Leaf. The group examined the ring, and number 76 realized she had underestimated the witches. Leaf noted that the magic stone in the ring was unusual. Number 76 explained that the exhibition often showcased what they found within the ancient ruins with magical powers for sale, and occasionally they would. She didn't finish her sentence. Wendy asked her to continue. It was then they were told that the exhibition would occasionally auction witches. Upon hearing this, everyone reacted with fear and then undisguised anger. Amy added that she was nearly sold to a noble at such an exhibition before York rescued her. Nightingale approached with a cold tone, assuring Amy that those responsible would eventually be punished. Number 76, maintaining her timid demeanor, added a comment about the ring. Leaf returned the ring to number 76, noting that Miss Agatha would be interested in it. The name sounded familiar to number 76, but she couldn't remember it off the bat. Wendy reassured everyone that things would get better in the city of Neverwinter, where they were safe. She spoke of King Roland's belief in an era where witches and ordinary people would coexist peacefully, free from the fear of being captured. Although still a tinge of suspicion, this message eased some of their anxieties. Number 76 slowly moved onto a stretcher and was carried out of the cabin by the sailors. As she left the ship, she finally saw the full view of the dock. Even in heavy snow, the activity was bustling, and the ships were unlike anything they had seen before. Wendy beamed with pride at everyone's fascination. Back at the diplomatic building, Manhwa was waiting for them. Wendy introduced Manhwa, who then used her ability to assess Hero's condition. Unfortunately, Manhwa couldn't regenerate Hero's legs unless they still had the severed limbs for reattachment. Amy, disappointed, asked if they needed to find new legs for Hero. Manhwa nodded, explaining that freshly severed ones would be best. Hearing such words from a sweet-looking girl made the witches shiver. Wendy playfully scolded her, telling her to not say such a terrifying thing, but Manhwa instantly explained that her statement was true. She recounted experiments ordered by Roland, such as swapping a rooster's wings with a hawk's to see if the rooster could fly and swapping limbs between frogs and rats, or the bodies of cows and sheep. Manhwa also invited the new witches to visit the lab if they were interested, which they quickly declined. Only number 76 seemed to be interested and wanted to know the results. Manhwa continued, explaining that initially, most experiments failed. However, once Lily joined, the success rate increased. But even then, the reattached limbs largely lost their function, and she had to cut them off and put them back. Wendy hurriedly covered Manhwa's mouth to prevent further unsettling stories. The group exchanged awkward glances, unsure how to continue the conversation. Wendy smiled and reassured them that a solution for Hero's legs would be found someday. She patted Manhwa's head, asking her to focus on healing number 76's injuries first. Manhwa used her ability and healed number 76 quickly. She then looked up in surprise and remarked it was unusual for someone to remain conscious after such a significant healing process. Usually, people would be very tired or fall asleep immediately. Number 76 was startled and about to explain, but Amy interrupted, tugging on Wendy's dress and requesting that her legs be used for Hero's treatment.